So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Ari Juels. He's a distinguished professor of computer science at Cornell University. He holds a name chair at the Jacobs Technion Cornell Institute, where he's the co-director of the Initiative for Cryptocurrencies and Contracts. He's also chief scientist at Chainlink Labs. He has an illustrious career. He's been chief scientist and director of RSA Lab, and also distinguished engineer at EMC. He has made significant contribution, impactful contribution to cryptography and information security. His papers on security and privacy, or RFIDs, and proof of retrievability of files from cloud. So if you store a file from a cloud, how you can make sure that they actually are stored there, or topics like fuzzy vault that combines biometrics and passwords. So these are with thousands of citations and very impactful work, and many other works that he has had. So in more recent time, he has been focusing on blockchain and cryptocurrencies, smart contracts, as well as continuing his previous interest in cryptography, cloud security, user authentication, and privacy. So without further ado, Dr. Juels, podium is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ray. I'm going to talk today about NFTs, as they're called, and two interesting technical problems they give rise to. First, though, I'm going to give some background on NFTs. Not everyone here may be intimately familiar with them. I'm going to explain what they are and also why we should care about them. So I expect that most people here have heard of NFTs, at least. Perhaps you've heard of CryptoPunks or Bored Apes. Maybe you've heard of the NFT called Everydays, which sold for something like $69 million at auction at Christie's. Perhaps you've heard about the irrational exuberance of the NFT market or its impact on the traditional art world, something I'm going to talk about today. Or perhaps you've heard about the fraud that is bedeviling, unfortunately, this nascent industry. This article here appeared just yesterday in the New York Times. But I think the ultimate touchstone for a cultural phenomenon going mainstream is its appearance on signage in Times Square. Here is a montage of signage from Times Square late last year. And all of this signage appeared during NFT.NYC, which is the community's flagship NFT event. And this happened during the, now seems distant, during the boom year of 2021. Also last year, the total sales volume of NFTs approached and nearly equaled that of the whole market for fine arts, the whole traditional fine arts market. The NFT market has since, along with the cryptocurrency market as a whole, dropped precipitously, but it's still significant. So, what are these NFTs? NFT stands for non-fungible token. I'll explain what that means. But what exactly are NFTs and what are they all about? And as I said, I'll talk also about why we should care about them. First, let me explain the term non-fungible. Here's an example of two fungible objects. $200 bills. They look different. One is an earlier edition of this banknote, one later edition, but they're functionally equivalent. As you have the same spending power, whether you have the one on the left or the one on the right. Or to put it another way, they're interchangeable. In contrast, these two objects are NFTs from one of the best known collections called the Bored Ape Yacht Club. They both represent apes, but each is unique in the sense that it has a unique set of characteristics, unique aesthetic appeal, and a single owner. They're also, in a sense, functionally different. The one on the left, for example, last sold for 105 Ether, that's the cryptocurrency in Ethereum, and that today is worth something like $200,000. The current asking price for the one on the left is 165 ETH. The one on the right last sold for 92 Ether and currently has an asking price of 96 ETH. So I'm just making the point that the market values of these two objects are different, as the market is valuing them differently, viewing them differently. And in that sense, they're not functionally equivalent. We refer to them as non-fungible. They're not fungible. Yeah. NFTs, of course, as I said, the term stands for non-fungible token. So just to recap, fungible objects are functionally identical. Dollars and Bitcoin would be examples of fungible objects. Non-fungible objects have unique units. NFTs generally, or the term NFT generally, refers to digital pointers that live on a blockchain to artworks or collectibles, represented typically as JPEGs or other files. So here, again, you see a Bored Ape, right? For example, this is an example NFT. Let me give you a few examples of famous NFT collections, just so that you know what these things look like. This is the Bored Ape collection I've referenced a few times, and referenced, of course, in the title of the talk. This collection was released in April of 2021. The total trading volume has exceeded $1 billion. And Bored Apes are owned by a long list of celebrities, including, for instance, the local Sun, Justin Bieber, television host Jimmy Fallon, Snoop Dogg, Madonna, Paris Hilton, and so on and so forth. Frankly, they're not really stellar artworks. For example, this popping eyeball here really seems like it should be on top of the hair of that ape, but the artist didn't seem to take pains to position it correctly. So I would classify them more as collectibles than fine art, but that's of course a matter of opinion. Here's another famous example, collection called CryptoPunks. These were an early NFT project from 2017. Many think that they catalyzed the NFT craze last year. The one at the bottom, for instance, that's CryptoPunk number 5822, sold for $23 million in February of this year, actually. They've been sold by Christie's, the auction house, as well as being sold online. Like Bored Apes, they're a popular choice for what are called PFPs, or profile pictures, on social media platforms, something I'll talk about shortly. The final example I want to mention shows how NFTs are entering the mainstream. This is a collection created by Dapper Labs in partnership with the NBA. This collection is referred to as the Top Shot collection. These are NBA Top Shot cards. And they include video that represents key moments in NBA basketball games. Now, Dapper Labs is also famous, as some of you probably know, for creating CryptoKitties, which I'll talk about a little later. All right, now let me explain basically from a technical standpoint, although from a 20,000-foot view, what an NFT is and how it works mechanically. So let's take, for example, a hypothetical collection here I'll call Crypto Rabbits. Here is a crypto rabbit, a rabbit from the collection. Right? The image of the crypto rabbit is stored in some persistent storage system, usually a system off-chain, not on the blockchain, simply because blockchain storage is expensive. So our crypto rabbit might, the image of our crypto rabbit might live, for instance, in a decentralized storage system called IPFS, or maybe Filecoin, but it's most likely going to live off-chain. Now, to be clear, and this is important, and I'll get back to this point later, anyone at all can download this image. Ownership of an NFT doesn't mean exclusive ability to access an image. It means ownership in a sense that is rather loosely defined, another thing I'll mention a bit later. What's present on the blockchain is a digital object that includes a pointer to the crypto rabbit image, or in some cases to metadata that will in turn point to the crypto rabbit image. And that digital object sits in a smart contract. That's a program running on the blockchain. The digital object is controlled or owned in much the same way that cryptocurrency is. That's to say, the owner of the object has a private cryptographic key that asserts her ownership through a blockchain address. And she can manage and use this key with the help of wallet software, basically the same wallet software that's used for control of cryptocurrency. The fact that she owns the NFT, of course, means that she can transfer ownership. She can give it or sell it to somebody else. Typically, an NFT is sold through what's referred to as a marketplace. And the best known NFT marketplace is OpenSea. OpenSea is responsible for the lion's share, in fact, of NFT sales today. If our user here sells her NFT successfully, she'll receive the proceeds, typically in cryptocurrency. And if she trades through a smart contract, the smart contract will guarantee that her NFT only changes hands when she receives funds from the buyer of the NFT. So that's a brief explanation of what NFTs are. Now, why should we care about them, right? Why should we care about these silly cartoon images as they seem to be at first glance? Well, there's a superficial but important reason, which I'll talk about first. Then there's some more substantive ones. But let me begin with the vanity application. Suppose you're, say, a young tech millionaire and you want to show off your wealth. How do you do it? How do you signal wealth and status to the community around you? The old way to do this was to buy a fancy car like this Maserati here and drive it into your company's parking lot. The problem today, though, is that people are increasingly online, right? If you're in a Zoom call, it's kind of hard to stick your Maserati on the shelf behind you to show it off. So here is the new way of signaling status and wealth. This is a Twitter profile. The hexagon around the Bored Ape there, you now know what a Bored Ape is, hexagon around the Bored Ape there indicates that Twitter has verified ownership of this Bored Ape by the holder of this Twitter account. This Bored Ape is actually worth about as much as the Maserati there in the upper right-hand corner. So what this person here is signaling is that he has a Maserati worth of digital goods. And in fact, he's signaling that he has 53 Bored Apes. So he has millions of dollars. This is the new way of signaling status. This, as I said, is the vanity application for NFTs. There are more substantive ones and more interesting ones. One reason to take an interest in NFTs is the way that they empower artists. For instance, my group has been talking with digital artists, many of whom tell us that they couldn't make a living doing digital art, at least, before the advent of NFTs. One really interesting feature of NFTs and NFT platforms is that they allow artists to take a cut of, to receive royalties for future sales of their work. In the traditional artwork, an artist only receives money when she first sells her work. But in the NFT world, she can receive royalties every time her artwork sells. And this is obviously very appealing to and empowering for artists. Artists can also, at least in principle, dictate who buys their work and how. And this is something I'm going to talk about in a little bit of detail later. Another reason that NFTs are interesting is that they provide strong provenance. What I mean is a clear record of where an NFT originated and who created it. Provenance is a murky thing in the traditional art world, and forgery and misattribution of artworks is a rampant problem. For example, back in 1989, Steven Spielberg purchased a Norman Rockwell painting, you see it here, entitled The Russian Schoolroom. In 2007, about 20 years later, the painting was discovered to have been stolen from a gallery in Missouri. This problem is not all that rare or unusual in the traditional art world, but because NFTs include a record of their creation and sales on a blockchain, this type of thing simply can't occur. Other problems can occur. There are some gaps, let's say, in verification of the authenticity of NFTs, even given their presence on blockchains. But those gaps are relatively small. And I'll talk about one way to try to address them, in fact. Now, to understand another reason that NFTs are important, it's worth considering the world's most expensive cat. Right? I'm not talking about Cato here, who's the world's most expensive real-world cat, but this guy, Dragon, who is the world's most expensive kitty on the blockchain. Dragon sold years ago, I think it was back in 2018, 2019, don't recall exactly, for something like $172,000. He was part of a game called CryptoKitties, which was developed in the early history of blockchain or smart contract technology back in 2017, that was responsible in large part for popularizing NFTs. And Dragon here is himself an NFT. The CryptoKitties game allows you to breed and buy and sell kitties. And it represents, in a sense, a universe unto itself, referred to here as the kittyverse. The ability to own and trade objects in a virtual world is another reason that NFTs are potentially going to become an important cultural phenomenon. NFTs are potentially going to become a cornerstone of the metaverse. Now, metaverse is just kind of a fancy term, as many of you know, for virtual realities that will exist in the future. But there's already a real estate boom in virtual worlds, in the metaverse. And people are buying up parcels of land represented as NFTs in virtual worlds that are being developed currently or at an embryonic phase. And of course, Facebook rebranded itself as Meta in a nod to the fact that Zuckerberg is betting the farm on the metaverse. NFTs are a big part of that vision. It's anticipated that objects in the metaverse will frequently be represented as NFTs. I also want to emphasize that NFTs don't necessarily have to be artworks. They've been used for other purposes. For example, they've been used to memorialize events in a censorship-resistant way. Cries for help by Shanghai residents during the recent COVID lockdown were turned into an NFT video called Voices of April, that you see mentioned in this article here. People are also exploring the representation of real-world real estate, not metaverse real estate, but actual brick and mortar real estate as NFTs. This article in Forbes discusses the sale of an apartment in Ukraine, as it happens, as an NFT. Okay, so now that you understand what NFTs are and why we should be interested in them, let me talk about a couple of the interesting technical challenges that they raise. The first challenge is bots. Right? NFTs are often sold in batch events. There's a whole bunch of NFTs are sold simultaneously, typically in the thousands, as a collection, often with some thematic consistency, like the Bored Ape collection. These events in which a whole bunch of NFTs are released simultaneously are known as drops. And it frequently happens when there is a popular NFT drop that scalper bots will scoop up NFTs and resell them. So we've seen this phenomenon with respect to real world goods like sneakers and concert tickets. It's now affecting the world of NFTs. When an NFT is released or a group of NFTs is released, bots will buy them up before ordinary users can, and the bot masters will then turn around and resell them because NFTs often increase in value after a drop has taken place. We've seen this, for example, in a couple of high-profile NFT drops by established companies. Time Magazine, for instance, dropped over 4,000 NFTs back in September of 2021. And to give you some sense of how aggressively bots acquired them, upon the last survey, the top 100 addresses holding these NFTs held almost a quarter of the NFTs in the collection. Adidas tried to address this problem of bots scooping up NFTs by imposing a per address limit on NFT acquisition when it did its drop. Adidas allowed a single address to acquire only 2 NFTs. But somebody managed to bypass this mechanism with a cleverly deployed smart contract and acquire, using a single address, 330 NFTs. So bots remain really problematic. I would like to propound as a potential solution to this problem and some others, the use of what's called decentralized identity. Let me first explain what decentralized identity is. The basic idea behind decentralized identity is the following. A user has a public-private key pair, just as she would have, for instance, for control of cryptocurrency. And an authority then, known as an issuer, could be, for instance, a Department of Motor Vehicles, say, creates a digital identity document or other credential for the user and binds it cryptographically with a digital signature to her public key. If you have a set of digital credentials of this kind, suppose everyone, for instance, has a digital driver's license issued by some set of trustworthy authorities, then you can pretty easily enforce a 1 NFT per person policy. In order to participate in an NFT drop, you need to provide your driver's license, and you can enforce a policy whereby you are able to buy only 1 NFT per driver's license. And then we manage, for the most part, to suppress aggressive bot involvement in NFT drops. This is all well and good, but there are 2 problems with this kind of naive approach using decentralized identity. The first problem is that decentralized identity systems, unfortunately, don't exist yet. And the reason for this is that there are no meaningful credential issuers. The second problem is a problem of privacy. My driver's license may have my birth date on it, for example, or I may not want to make my name known publicly in an NFT drop. So this basic solution I showed you won't quite work. If we take, for instance, an authority like the Social Security Administration in the US, in principle, if it were to digitally issue credentials carrying your Social Security number, you could do exactly what I described. But the Social Security Administration is unlikely to become an issuer of digital credentials anytime in the future. And Social Security numbers in the United States are privacy sensitive. So people are not going to want to place them online. We can sidestep both of these problems using emerging tools called privacy preserving oracles. And unfortunately, I won't have time in this talk to give details, but suffice it to say that privacy preserving oracles enable me to prove facts about sessions with existing unmodified websites. So setting aside the privacy issue for the moment, what you could do in principle is allow somebody to prove to a verifier that her Social Security number is X, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, for instance, without the Social Security Administration needing to do anything or even be aware that it's happening. As you can do this using the existing unmodified Social Security Administration website. And what this means is that you can build a decentralized identity system without any changes to existing infrastructure. How do you do this? The idea is very simply that a user like Alice here can prove to a committee, a collection of verifiers, what her Social Security number is. The committee then can generate a credential for her. And assuming trust in a majority of the nodes in the committee or a supermajority of nodes in the committee, a community can trust the credentials that they issue. Privacy, though, is still an issue with this setup, right? I haven't told you how to address the privacy issue yet. The privacy issue we can address by having the committee use distributed cryptographic protocols, in particular, what's called a distributed pseudorandom function, to derive what I'll refer to as a unique blinded identifier for Alice. So again, I won't be able to give details, but what I can say is that the committee can generate a random looking number that corresponds in a deterministic way to Alice's Social Security number without any member of the committee individually learning Alice's Social Security number, and with no way for somebody outside the committee or any individual in the committee to link the blinded identifier to her Social Security number. So you can think of the blinded identifier as a kind of cryptographically transformed social security number, one that protects privacy. Given this kind of identifier, now we can implement a bot-resistant NFT drop in a privacy-preserving way. We can, in particular, enforce this one NFT per person policy. But as I mentioned, it would be nice under many circumstances to be able to provide artists with the ability to enforce during their drops. We used exactly this technique in February of this year to run a raffle for an NFT created by a well-regarded digital artist named Zach Lieberman. As participants were able to use their social security numbers or another mechanism, which I won't talk about today, to enter a fair raffle, one that was bot resistant, for the NFT you see in the video there. And I'll just point out that the identity document created by an issuer, created by a committee, can itself be an NFT. It's just a digital object, and digital objects can live on a blockchain. Let me talk now about the second technical challenge I'm planning to discuss today, namely what's called fractionalization. Let me give you an example, motivating example for the discussion here. The Doge NFT. This is an image of a dog, a breed called its breed is Shiba Inu. And this image is famous thanks to cryptocurrency called Dogecoin, which I imagine most people here have heard of. A smart contract-based organization bought the original Doge NFT, the authoritative image of this dog, for $4 million back in June of 2021. And they did something clever with it. Well, first of all, they marketed it heavily. Their website trumpets the decade of internet history associated with this piece and likens it to the Mona Lisa, I kid you not. Then they took this NFT and they broke it up into pieces and sold off the pieces. This is the process known as fractionalization. And currently, this one NFT has been fractionalized into billions of little pieces. There's a lot of money to be made doing this kind of thing with a popular NFT. The valuation of this one NFT as a result of fractionalization rose to hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, fractionalization can be a good thing in that it spreads interest in the arts, but sometimes it's not such a good thing. There are some artists, for instance, who don't want to see their works fractionalized. They don't like the kind of commercial spin that fractionalization puts on the pieces that they have produced and released to the world. And additionally, fractionalization can lead to confusion about ownership of NFTs. If you think of NFTs as digital assets like any other, you realize that they should be subject to know your customer diligence and anti-money laundering regulations. And these things can be hard to enforce when certain types of fractionalization are at play. So an interesting question arises: how can we prevent fractionalization? It turns out that proving that a single key controls an NFT surprisingly isn't enough to prove that an NFT hasn't been fractionalized. Why is that? Well, suppose that Alice wants to prove that she controls a particular address, which in turn controls a given NFT. How does she prove her control of this address? Well, what she would do typically, if she wants to prove this to someone like Bob, shown here, for instance, what she would do is engage in a cryptographic protocol. She might sign a random challenge sent to her by Bob, or use a traditional zero-knowledge proof or argument of knowledge. The problem with this classical setup, though, is that it actually doesn't ensure that Alice knows the secret that she appears to be proving knowledge of to Bob. The reason is that this could actually be the setup. Bob may not be aware of the fact that Alice doesn't hold the key, SK, private key, unilaterally. Rather, that key is shared among 3 different participants who themselves engage in a distributed cryptographic protocol to generate a signature. or to produce a proof of knowledge of the private key. In other words, it may be the fact that no one person knows the private key, but the private key has been shared out among a collection of people. And if Alice was purportedly showing Bob or proving to Bob knowledge of her private key to demonstrate that no fractionalization had taken place, this process could potentially be undermined through sharing of the private key, as I've shown here. Instead, what we want is a notion that we're referring to as complete knowledge. Suppose we have a key pair, for instance, and we want to prove knowledge of the private key. A complete knowledge proof in this case would be a proof of knowledge of the private key, but it would be a proof of knowledge of the private key that additionally shows that the key is known by a single entity. There's somebody in the world who knows the private key in its entirety. How do we accomplish a complete knowledge proof? Unfortunately, I won't have time to explain in detail how the constructions we've devised work, but let me at least give some intuition. A complete knowledge proof requires access to a special resource. It's a resource with, for instance, an unusual computing capability. I'll give you an example in a second. A CK proof is one that requires access to this resource to produce successfully. And additionally, the secret that you're proving knowledge of, private key, for instance, has to be fed into this resource to generate the proof. In order to be fed into this resource, it has to be the case that somebody knows this key in its entirety. That's the only way to feed it to the resource. This resource could, for example, be a Bitcoin miner. We've developed a CK protocol in which a proof requires feeding a private key directly to a machine used for Bitcoin mining, what's known as an ASIC. And in order to feed the private key into such a mining machine, you have to know it to begin with. So we can show that fractionalization hasn't been taken place in this way. All right, in the remaining couple of minutes, I'd like to talk very briefly about some intriguing forms of interdisciplinary work, some interesting interdisciplinary questions that NFTs give rise to. Take a famous work of traditional art like the Mona Lisa. Everyone knows what the Mona Lisa looks like, but it's not as though if you go to visit it in the Louvre, you're going to be able to penetrate this 20-foot thick protective fence of tourists to get close and admire Da Vinci's brushstrokes, right? When you see a famous work of art like this, part of the thrill is simply the physical proximity to it, the fact that you're in the same room as this famous piece. There's only one Mona Lisa in the world. So when you visit the Louvre, you're engaging in a unique experience. With NFTs, that experience is lost because, as I said at the beginning of the talk, the image of an NFT can be downloaded and experienced by anyone. There's no notion of physical proximity. One of the things that we're exploring, and this is as much a psychological question as a cryptographic question, is whether we can somehow replicate the experience of physical proximity to an NFT. And we're doing a little experiment to explore this question. We've commissioned the piece you see on the left there from a glass blower. This is roughly a 10-foot high screen constructed of glass and aluminum. And we're going to use it as a projection surface for NFTs, but constrain the device in such a way that will only display NFTs held by a private key that's actually sitting in hardware on the device itself. So when you see an NFT displayed, you know you're in some sense close to the NFT. This is something that we'll be doing at a gallery opening in a couple of months based on this principle. Similarly, with a colleague who studies traditional art markets, my group has been exploring the mutual influences of traditional art markets and NFT markets and how blockchains and information security can play a transformative role really in NFT-driven art markets of the future. And we speculate on a few ways that this might happen in the paper. And finally, with a legal scholar, my group has been exploring some of the knotty legal problems that NFTs raise, particularly around copyright issues, which get awfully tricky. You can find blog posts on both of these topics and many others on the IC3 website, which I encourage you to visit if you'd like to learn more. papers on CK and on what we call fair drop, the bot-resistant NFT drop that we implemented through our raffle will be available soon. With that, I'll wrap up. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ari. It was a great talk and such a timely talk in the time that, at the time that we hear about NFT almost every day. Yeah, it was very, very thought-provoking talk. So I like people to invite people to ask their questions. You can write in chat, and I'll try to monitor the chat. Do I see anything?
Yeah, I see a question here. Is the committee in the decentralized identity an open internet-based group that anyone can join and leave? If not, what are the research challenges in making one? In our research, we didn't dictate any particular mechanism by which the committee gets selected. So it could be selected in the same way that a committee is selected, for instance, in a proof of stake scheme, or it might be selected in some other way. The work that we're doing is, well, that question is really orthogonal to the research that we're doing, but that is a good question.
Okay, so while we are waiting for other questions, I may ask a question about this. I think the last topic that you mentioned, I guess it really brings the issue of copyright. So what's the definition of copyright in this context? So you're saying the actual digital object can be copied, right? So I think that's
yeah. Well, that's true of many things, of course. Almost anything now,
right,
given the digital tools that people have, can easily be copied, can be replicated. Copyright law is meant to impose restrictions on the copying that can legally be performed. People have not yet given careful thought to how copyright law should map onto NFT ownership. To put it another way, the legal questions surrounding NFTs and what NFT ownership means are quite murky. And the blog post that I pointed to outlines some of the difficulties that are likely to arise when people begin to consider the legal ramifications of NFT ownership.
right. So I guess the question is that if I copy a digital object that corresponds to an NFT, am I overstepping my legal rights, or is there a problem that I have this picture in my home? Is that a copyright violation, or?
Yeah, so this is not a subject in which I'm an expert, and I'm not even a co-author
right.
of that particular blog post. My PhD students have worked on it. But I will say that different NFT projects declare different rules around ownership and right. the right to copy an NFT. In many cases, though, the rules they're trying to set don't harmonize with real-world legal regimes. In other words, the rights that they think they're giving to NFT owners, they may not actually be conferring on NFT owners.
Right. Thank you. Yes, it's very, as you said, it's quite a challenging topic.
It is.
Yes. So so there are other, aside from bot resistance, which other cybersecurity concerns are top of mind for you in NFTs?
Great question. I would say all of the traditional cybersecurity issues one would be concerned with, spear phishing, for instance, is a big one, become particularly problematic or acute in the case of NFTs because a breach can lead to rapid monetization. I'll give you an example. In the paper I mentioned that we co-authored with my colleague Mukti Khair, a scholar of art markets, we predicted that at some point somebody would compromise an NFT creator's account on social media, for instance, and forge NFTs in the name of this artist and sell them to victims. This happened just in the past few weeks to Mike Winkelmann, the creator of Everydays, known by the moniker Beeple, A social media account of his got hacked. The hacker directed users to a fake NFT collection, which they alleged using his compromised account that he had created, and sold them, and victims lost money as a result. So these traditional cybersecurity problems are, as you can see, compounded through the combination with NFTs.
Right. Okay, so there is one other question. Should platforms like OpenSea enforce some type of copyright?
It's unclear how OpenSea would enforce copyright. One thing they could do, and the question of whether they should do this was raised in the New York Times article I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. One thing they could do is try to clamp down on plagiarism. Because anyone can copy what is simply a JPEG file of, say, a Bored Ape, anyone can mint an NFT that is identical in appearance to an original Bored Ape and go sell it. That's going to violate, in principle at least, copyright. It's going to violate the intellectual property rights of the collection creator and potentially the NFT owner. OpenSea has, to date, some allege, not been taking plagiarism seriously. Not, for instance, when an NFT is listed, looking to see whether there are other NFTs on the same platform that bear a strong visual similarity to it, and that the newly created NFT therefore may have been plagiarized.
Okay, so there are lots of questions. I'll go through them as much as we can. Could you explain more how we can replicate the physical experience that is lost with NFTs? I think the new project that you mentioned.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have time to give details, and I won't have time to give many details. But the idea is that this projection surface we've created will only display NFTs that have been sent to an address whose private key resides on the display itself. So the idea is that when you see an NFT on the display, you know that you are in physical proximity to the key, at least, that controls that NFT. And the question is, does this give you, I don't expect it to replicate the experience fully, but does this give you something of the thrill of being in the presence of, say, the Mona Lisa, right? If you see a Bored Ape on the screen and you know that the private key controlling that Bored Ape is 10 feet away from you, does that give you the feeling of being in proximity in some sense to that Bored Ape? And I believe it may actually confer this feeling upon viewers. Our experiment aims to determine whether or not it does.
Right. Yes. So this becomes proximity to the key of the NFT. Is that?
Right. Yeah, it's proximity to the key. So again, anyone can download the image, anyone can view the image. But in this case, if you're seeing the image on the display, you know you're in physical proximity to the locus of control, if you will.
Okay. Very interesting interpretation of things. Other questions. I think Professor Juels mentioned using SSN to verify identity to guarantee the one person, one NFT. However, it seems countries like some countries, the kind of information is not very hard to get, but anyone around the world should be able to mint NFT. That does your design increase the difficulty of minting NFTs for some countries?
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure of I think are asking one of two questions. So let me see if I'm interpreting the question correctly. You're asking what happens when, say, in countries where, say, your social security number isn't private. That's okay. In order to prove that a social security number, or let's say a national identifier is yours, you need to show that you can log into an authoritative website, government website, that will state in a web session, TLS session, that this national identifier is yours. In other words, knowing that Alice has a particular national identifier is not enough to impersonate Alice. You have to be able to show that an authoritative website demonstrates or states that you have a particular national identifier in order to claim it. So that's not a problem. So that's one of two possible questions you're asking. Another might be, what do we do in countries where it's hard for people, where some people don't have national identifiers? What do we do about refugees, for instance, or political asylum seekers, right, who may not be able to prove that they have a national identifier? We've been exploring other ways of establishing identities. For instance, in the raffle we conducted, users had the option of using what are called POAPs, proof of attendance protocol tokens. These are NFTs that are given to people at live events and can similarly serve the process of deduplication, or let's say building Sybil resistance in NFT drops. So there are alternatives to the use of national identifiers for the corner cases where national identifiers aren't available.
Any other questions? Do you think NFTs will disrupt the ticketing industry?
That's a great question. I'm not going to prognosticate on that question because I'm a mere technologist, not a marketeer or economist, but it's certainly possible. And so people have been using NFTs as effectively as tickets. It makes sense for tickets to be rendered in digital form. Plus, NFTs are kind of being marketed in some cases as, let's say, lifestyle packages. For instance, if you are a bored ape holder, that entitles you to attend certain events. So you're not just able to purchase a ticket to participate in this event. You need to belong to the club. And I think that kind of bundling of different experiences or form of ownership could well start to play a role in admission to events. So I do indeed think NFTs could disrupt the ticketing industry.
Okay, thank you so much, Ari. It was a great session. Thank you very much for your talk.
Thank
and
you.
Both technology and all other aspects of it. And thank you for the questions and answering all the questions. Thank you.